can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so how long have I got? You said 7 minutes. Yeah, I'll try my best to sort of summarise the mental health situation at the minute into 7 minutes. So really, for me in my line of work, of course, I'm biased. I'm going to think that mental health is possibly the biggest challenge that we face in 2021. I think it's already been a big challenge. I think that there was already a pandemic before COVID-19, and that was the mental health pandemic. Of course, it's sort of something that is becoming more and more openly talked about. I think there has been a stigma that still needs to be tackled. But just to give a bit of a snapshot for 2019, so pre-COVID, the picture of mental health in the UK. This is some stats that I've worked with before by some research that was done for Work in Confidence. And the stats, so this is 2019, pre-COVID, 1 in 4 people would experience a mental health struggle within a year. Suicide was the highest killer of men under the age of 45. We had 12.7% of sick leave was attributed to mental health, and yet 60% of people said that they would not disclose a mental health struggle with their employer for fear of being judged or perhaps not being supported. And yet 80, well no, in fact it was, yeah, so better mental health support for workplaces. Work in Confidence estimated that it would save UK businesses up to 8 billion a year. So when we go through those stats, it paints a pretty bleak picture, to be honest. And this was all before COVID. And I think one of the main things that I want to present in the context is that we need to understand this pandemic not just as a physical virus, but this is collective trauma. The whole world, globally, we are having a bit of an existential crisis. We really are confronting our mortality. We are collectively grieving. We are being bombarded with death, with illness, with insecurity, with sort of a really coming up against what it means to struggle, to suffer, to be disconnected from each other. All of these things I think we very much started beforehand. And so we need to kind of get our head around, and I think it's really important that businesses understand this in the context of their employees and as ourselves as individuals, that COVID isn't just out there as a physical virus, but it is in here. We carry this constant level of hypervigilance, just trying to manage ourselves and our lives around the pandemic. We hold it in our nervous system. And so we're constantly on high alert. Our nervous systems are perpetually flooded with adrenaline, with cortisol. We go into sort of a fight or flight or a freeze or flop over a danger that we can't physically see, which makes it really difficult for our nervous systems, for our general health, which of course is very important at this moment, to perform to its optimum level. From a business perspective, I think the things that really stand out to me and that I've received a lot of feedback from the clients that I've worked with is one, I think, is lockdown. Lockdown in itself was not a holiday. It wasn't really even time off for many people. And now we're in this sort of lockdown take 2. And I think what's really important is that just because we're in this second lockdown does not mean that we are used to it. It does not mean that because we are now working from home and have been for a while, that we are just working from home. We are still at home in a pandemic trying to work. That I think before, schools were off and there was a bit of an understanding with that. But for some, if kids end up being in contact with somebody, all of a sudden we've got very unexpected childcare issues that have been thrown into people who are still working from home. And that's something to hold carefully. I think the other thing that it has sort of helped with, but we need to be mindful of, is addressing this myth that as whole human beings, we are able to leave our personal traumas at home going to work. And that it also addresses sort of this fantasy, and I want to highlight this because I'm hearing on the radar a little bit this sort of fantasy that when a vaccine comes, or when COVID, quote unquote, goes away, although we don't know sort of how that might look, that the long-term mental health impact is either going to be vaccinated with it or also just disappear. And for business leaders, and I include employees in that too, we're all the leaders of our own life and our own role. You know, people are under enormous pressure to perform in ultimately survival mode conditions. And I think for many businesses, 2020 collectively has completely thrown the previously highly competitive, individualistic, profit-orientated paradigm completely on its head. And that leaders at this point are having to cultivate a well of emotional strength, as opposed to perhaps a sales stamina that has been in previous times. And that really means about taking responsibility and organisations supporting their teams and their staff to take responsibility of looking after your mental health that really is an integrated and holistic approach, learning how to self-regulate, learning how to de-stress, and ultimately kind of recognising that organisations aren't run by strategy or sales or Q4 success, they're run by people. And if our people aren't looked after, then we really will end up potentially perpetuating sort of this crisis management situation way after sort of, whether it be the economy or whether it be businesses in general may recover, but our long-term recovery absolutely depends on the recovery of mental health. So that's my 7-minute conclusion of mental health in the pandemic of 2020.